Okay, so listen up. So Carlisle Vineyard is planted in 1927, and there's some really, it's mostly Zinfandel, but it's really interesting and very, very esoteric red grape varietals that you find inside here. And I'm not sure that it's so important that I have to name all of them, but it's interesting enough that it's, okay, Grand Noir de Colomette, Pedro San, Tempranillo, and then he literally has this vine that has a red tag on it, and he calls it the old black shit. And I'm not even kidding you. Call Mike, and that's what he calls it, because they're still doing studies on it to figure out what it really is. It's really crazy. So it's in 1927. So as you can recall, all of these pioneers and stuff, they didn't just plant mono varietals inside their vineyards, because they didn't know what the weather was going to be like, if they were going to have a vintage at all, or if they're going to be able to harvest anything. So they had planted all these different varietals inside there. So this is Carlisle Zinfandel. In my opinion, I think Carlisle is as far as Zinfandel, and I would add Syrah producers in the New World, probably one of the top producers. I really, really enjoy his wines very much. They are not shy, as you can tell by putting your nose inside this glass. They are every bit as hedonistic as any other Zinfandel. But on top of that, with these old vine, this sappiness, that intensity, it's a very seamless wine. It's not just all this big, jammy, overt fruit right in front and just kind of fades out and into this kind of vodka finish on the end because of the high alcohols. But you can actually taste those flavors all the way to the end, which is pretty amazing.
Isn't shy Zen an oxymoron anyway? Maybe. I think a lot of Zin producers do strive for kind of an overexpression of a lot of fruit, alcohol, ripeness, and clearly this does not. So I suppose in that sense it's not overdone.
The Zinfandel sort of thought of as America's grape. Maybe that's a cop-out, but are there producers outside of the States that are producing Zinfandels that we would know? Or because I think the origins of Zinfandel is Hungary.
Croatia. Well, I would back up and say that the traditional American wine is actually a field blend that involved Zinfandel, which was this mysterious variety that they haven't quite figured out how it got to be what it is, but it changed. It came into the United States through European channels across New York State, got planted in Sonoma, California, propagated, was well beloved by a lot of European farmers in the 19th century, interplanted with other varieties, and I would argue that that kind of field blend, such as was just described, or often including Petit Syrah, or Carignan, or Mourvedre, or other ranges of varieties that weren't particularly carefully monitored by the people who planted these vineyards, that is probably America's signature wine style for the world, not varietally labeled Zinfandel.
Right.
However, Zinfandel, there have been attempts by producers in Puglia to say that Primitivo is genetically close enough to call itself Zinfandel or something like it. But lawsuits ensued, and therefore they don't do that anymore. And so I don't know that anybody else has really tried.
Australia
has done actual. Have they taken cuttings over there?
Yeah. Brazil, which is a wacky place. Brazil, in the south, grew more Zinfandel than any place in California until not that long.
How about that?
This sort of leads me kind of where I'm going. We seem to in the New World focus a lot on the individual grape. My lovely wife is from Chile, and they focus on the cepa, the actual grape, rather than the region. So you can have from Casablanca people competing by grape, not necessarily by region, with the same grape. You can have two expressions of the same grape coming out of the same region. In the States, are we focusing more on the individual grape, or are we focusing on the region? I guess that's my question overall. If we're focusing on the grape.
Most labeling in the United States is by grape variety, but most grape variety labeling is a recognition of the European antecedent that inspired that wine.
Okay, okay.
So producers who make Chardonnay are saying the word Chardonnay, but for the most part are adhering to a certain Burgundian principle, hopefully, in most of their cases. And I think with red wine it's more interesting and more dynamic, and I believe there's a future for red wine to be much more brand name identified than varietally identified, because we have a very confused notion of what Cabernet Sauvignon is, because there's $6 Cabernet Sauvignon and there's $600 Cabernet Sauvignon, right? And there's a lot of quality space between those two, so that you may not think they're the same thing. So we shouldn't be an ingredient-based wine culture. We have been for the first couple of generations of the modern American winemaking mindset. But I think going forward, we will be a brand-oriented one and less pigeonholed by variety. That said, we'll still have a lot of varietally named wines in red, white, pink, and what have you. But I don't know that anybody in the New World has made that major step to become branded in a successful way. Outside of a hand, there's a couple examples that are major brands right now, like The Prisoner is a good example. That is sort of a Zinfandel-based blend, but doesn't follow Vendrum, another excellent example, that doesn't follow a varietal course that creates this sort of image for its own taste. I think we'll see a lot more of that going forward. Conundrum.
But I hope it becomes regional before it becomes brand.
And thanks, Jim, for bringing it back, because that was really the question. Is there regional or specific vineyard identity here? And in many cases, there are vineyard, Ridge has been awesome at this, saying, Pagani Ranch and not saying Zinfandel, right? As an example. When we know it's basically a field blend, but they're featuring the property, And some of the Pinot producers are doing a lot of that too, but they're still saying Pinot, because that counts for a lot in the marketing and the identification and pricing of the wine.
Even if there's a lot of Syrah.
Well, I don't know that really goes on.
No. Nobody in this room.
Speaking of Syrah, I think
What, can we,
nice segue.
there is one more question, then we'll go to the...
What do you mean by a field blend?
Oh, good question. A field blend is where a grape grower interspersed numerous varieties of vines in one vineyard without particularly orienting, like one row is all Petite Syrah, and the next row is all Grenache, and the next row is, Zinfandel. They may have put vines in different spots because there wasn't an understanding that much 150 years ago of managing a vineyard as there is now. And so vines weren't even all that well identified. You just knew you're getting some sort of red grape variety. You could put a stick in the ground, and 5 years later you might be able to make some wine out of it.
And that's one of the most important things, is they mature at different times.
Right.
And so the original idea in Bordeaux, when they were planting Cabernet Merlot, Cabernet Franc, they were all compensating at the time of ripeness. We in the New World began to pick our Merlot very ripe, our Cabernet very ripe, our Cabernet Franc very ripe from different places, and blending them together and acting like we were doing a Bordeaux-style blend. But if you've got Carignan, which happens later, you've got Mourvedre, you've got Syrah, you've got Grenache, and all these things planted together, that's how you get the balance in the wine when you pick it. Some things are a little green with higher acidity, some things are totally ripe and over the top. And when you pick your field, you made a wine that was interesting and harmonious because of the way it was planted. All this diversion towards having single varieties planted in single areas, picked at maximum ripeness, has given us a totally different kind of wine. And Ridge was the first people, for me anyway, the Occidental had 13, 15 different percentages, different varieties, and they identified them, and people thought, oh, I don't like that one. When it was pure Zinfandel, I loved it, but now it's got Carignan, and it's got a little bit more Mourvedre in there and different things, and I don't like it nearly as much, which is America's obsession with single varieties. But
and ingredient labeling.
Single mindedness.
Well, so does anyone currently make a marketable field blend?
Oh, absolutely. There are many examples of single vineyard wines. Jim just mentioned one. There are a lot of other producers. It's mostly driven by old vine Zinfandel in which those vineyards are not set, there's not been an accurate census of what each variety is necessarily. There's a sense maybe that you can tell you can do the ethnographic research and look at the leaves and say, oh, that's actually Senso and not Zin, or that's actually Mourvèdre and not Zin. And they can get pretty close, but it's never complete. And there are plenty of examples that the major Zin producers have been the best at identifying not only what's in the vineyard, but also not branding it as a varietal wine. So people like Ravenswood and Ridge certainly are leaders in that, and others. Carlisle is a great example of it too. You know, and to Roberto's earlier point, there's vines they can't even identify yet, because vines over a series of generations change. The genetic code changes. Sometimes the color of the skin changes. And many things happen. They're living things. They evolve, they grow old, they adapt to their environment, and they crap out.
You know why you're a criminal, and if you have things with your Zinfandel that add complexity to your...
Yeah, well, Burgundy, hey, wait a second, but to that point, Great Burgundy and Barolo used to be field blends before anybody sorted things out. Barolo absolutely was.
Red dye, all these dark, pigmented...
We'll talk about that in a moment when we get to Gaia.
Steve,
So